Voices of doom. As the year 2000 approaches, we hear them with increasing frequency. Turn on the news, read a paper. Hints of calamity seem to fill our days. We're haunted by the coming millennium. Will it be the end of the world?
Experts tell us that at the end of every century, a strange phenomena occurs. Mysteries arise, prophecies and myths emerge. The hard edge of science converges with the darkest corners of religious beliefs. So, is it simply a case of millennial madness? Or is there significance to the fact that many religions and cultures predict an end time and suggest that our generation could be the last?
Discover why dreams of dire earth changes are driving ordinary people to relocate.
All of a sudden, there is a huge tidal wave, and I can see it coming.
Check the evidence offered by biblical scholars who claim the final countdown to Armageddon has begun.
I see this prophetical scenario right now in our span of history.
Find out why NASA scientists believe our planet is threatened by a collision with an asteroid.
These must be found as soon as possible because they have our name on it.
And finally, we'll explore the voices of hope. People with a fearless vision of the future.
We are at the threshold of an evolutionary transition of immense proportions.
Hello, I'm Brad Johnson. Join me as we explore the mysteries of the millennium. As the millennium approaches, warnings of apocalypse come in many guises. The Bible, prophecy, science, and myth. Famous prophets like Nostradamus and Edgar Cayce have an incredible track record for their predictions, but some prophecies are showing up in an intensely personal form. Vivid and terrifying dreams, dreamt by ordinary people just like you and me. Ask around. Is someone you know plagued by nightmares of global disasters? The question is, are we merely recycling what we see and hear on the news? Or do these dreams have a more prophetic and sinister meaning?
I'm in the yard. This earthquake has occurred. And as a result of the earthquake, the mountain is beginning to rumble and it's starting to go off. And the water has receded out of the sound and it's coming back in the form of a tidal wave. There was no fear, you know, when I woke up, but it was a sense of, oh, this could happen. This could really happen. My wife had dreams around the same time I did that were very similar.
That same week, our best friends were also dreaming about earthquakes of Mount Rainier erupting. Stuart dreamed that he and Brian were watching Mount Rainier erupt. His wife, Anna, dreamt that she and I were driving as fast as we could to get out of town, stop for the night, and that's when the earthquake hit. And I dreamt of huge tidal waves.
We decided, well, why take a chance? Let's go. And we picked up our roots and left.
We had just moved to Salt Lake, and I went to the hairdresser, and she said, what brought you here? And I said, well, it's a long story, dreams of destruction and research. She said, funny you say that, but I've had dreams too of destruction. She heard a rumble, and a tornado cloud appeared, which would drop 1, 2, 3, 4, perhaps a dozen tornadoes into the valley. So I put this message on the internet. I asked, has anyone out there had a dream about tornadoes, earthquakes, or comets in Salt Lake? I had about a half dozen people respond immediately who had had dreams about comets hitting Salt Lake.
Michael Ortiz Hill is an author whose own apocalyptic dreams led him to investigate the dreams of others.
I collected dreams from about 120 people from all over the world. The dreams were effectively the same dream. The people were dreaming and redreaming different portions of the same landscape. In terms of the dreams I've collected, I would say probably 70% of them end in cataclysm.
It's as if I'm in a high tower and all of a sudden there is a huge tidal wave, and I can see it coming.
It felt like as if everything was starting to go into a very fast and rapid pace in the dream, and I was thrown from war to war.
I think people are having these dreams now for a couple of reasons. One is that they're reading the situation at hand in a very profound way. Things are falling to pieces, and people know it. It's not merely psychological fantasy. It's a very profound image. People who live in the inner city have no doubt that apocalypse is now. You know, it's not in the future.
Dreams of doomsday haunt not only our minds, but our myths. Journalist and researcher Graham Hancock has discovered many ancient myths with a timetable that eerily matches these contemporary dreams.
Amongst the Hopi Indians of Arizona, there is a very powerful tradition that the end of the world is coming in the next 20 years. The ancient Maya of Central America have the most amazing system. What the Mayan traditions are telling us is that a great movement of the earth is going to bring all civilization to an end on the 23rd of December, 2012 AD. Let us regard with humility the possibility that these warnings may be true. Even the Holy Bible tells us that we are living in the last of days. As I ran a computer analysis on cataclysm myths from all around the world, I found it repeatedly stated that the cataclysm would recur.
From the great flood in the Bible, to the story of Atlantis, to the myths of pre-Columbian America, the message, Hancock suggests, is the same. Ancient man is trying to pass down a warning that civilization has been destroyed before, and that it can and will happen again.
We can only speculate as to the agency that caused that cataclysm. In Fingerprints of the Gods, I put forth one theory which may explain it. It's the theory of an American professor called Charles Hapgood in the early 1950s, and it's called Earth crust displacement. Earth crust displacement envisages a shift of the entire outer crust of our planet in one piece around the core of the planet, rather like the loose skin of an orange slipping over the fruit inside the orange. Moving land that is in cold parts of the planet into warm parts of the planet. Warm parts of the planet into cold parts of the planet. An unbelievably horrendous cataclysm. In Iran, you get memories of a sudden freeze, a dire winter, which lasts forever and destroys a warm and bountiful homeland. In other parts of the world, there are memories of a black, bituminous rain falling from the skies, of huge earthquakes, of a shuddering and movement of the earth. I suspect that all of these myths are remembering the same global cataclysm.
Dire winters, black rain. Have you noticed the weather lately?
Over the past century, climate has indeed become more extreme. What you see if you look at those statistics is an increase in the frequency of tornadoes.
You gotta really go. You gotta blaze, buddy. Get up under the girder. It sounded like a freight train. It just passed right on top of us.
Hail is a very important weather element because it has such a tremendous impact on structures that man builds. And there's been a perception that hail perhaps has increased. Man is adding to the level of carbon dioxide
Now, as you continue to add greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, you change the amount of the heat-holding capacity that the atmosphere has at various different levels.
Some regions of the Antarctic Peninsula have been losing floating extensions or ice shelves that have been there for thousands of years, presumably, and they are definitely melting off, and that certainly is related to warming.
The increase in greenhouse gases that man adds to the atmosphere will actually change the planet's temperature, which then will lead to other changes, such as changes in rainfall patterns, extreme events, typhoons, and whatnot.
If we have less rain in the grain belts in the summer, life gets harder right away. So that's a big problem that we would face. There certainly is the possibility of extension of tropical diseases, for example. Would we be seeing malaria in central Pennsylvania?
Drought, famine, plagues. Biblical scholars might say it all sounds awfully familiar. Warning signs that the end is near.
Up next, find out why some believers are convinced that Virgin Mary sightings are on the rise. Then discover why astronomers think global destruction could literally come out of the blue.
All of this when Mysteries of the Millennium returns. The heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with a fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. This is how St. Peter describes the fiery end of the world as prophesied in the Bible. Was he speaking in symbols and metaphors, as many religious scholars insist? Or could St. Peter have been describing an actual event with a real timetable?
I believe that the ancient Hebrew prophets predicted an exact scenario. And the key to it is that it would all begin to come together in concert at the same stage of history. Jesus predicted there would be certain birth pangs, as he called them in Matthew chapter 24. He said that there would be wars and rumors of wars. He said that there would be earthquakes. Great earthquakes in various places. Another birth pang that would increase the frequency and intensity would be global weather patterns changing. Jesus said there would be this outbreak of major plagues around the world. So I see these pieces of this prophetical scenario really fitting together right now in our span of history. I don't think there's anything magical about the year 2000. However, it is amazing that it seems that all of these various converging pieces of this prophetic pattern are coming together at about that time.
Another piece of the prophetic puzzle is a figure called the Antichrist, a satanic world dictator. Some believers say he will soon appear and trigger a final global war.
Over the centuries, the image of the Antichrist and belief in the Antichrist has exerted a powerful hold on the Christian imagination. The concept of the Antichrist arises from various passages in the Bible which speak of a demonic, sinister, satanic creature who will arise in the last days and persecute believers. In the book of Revelation, the Antichrist is referred to as the beast. Antichrist has been identified with Muhammad, with various Islamic military leaders. Almost any public figure who gains enough visibility is likely to be identified as the Antichrist. Ronald Reagan, Henry Kissinger, Gorbachev. Many anti-Catholics continue to insist that the Pope will ultimately emerge as the Antichrist. So there have been a lot of candidates over the years for this post.
Well, if my calculations are correct, the Antichrist would have to be alive somewhere in Europe right now. And I would say he would probably be in his 40s. He is not well known now, but when he receives a mortal wound from which he will miraculously be cured, he will then be given global recognition.
At the end of the Great Tribulation, Jesus Christ will return as the conquering warrior king with the saints who have been waiting with him for 7 years. And Christ and the saints then will destroy the Antichrist and his armies in what's called the Battle of Armageddon.
Passages like Daniel chapter 11 help us to put together how that war will start. All of the nations around Israel would become intoxicated with Jerusalem, and that they would start a war which would bring all the nations of the world into it. I believe there are 3 nuclear exchanges that you can trace through the book of Revelation. Take Revelation chapter 6. The Apostle John says, I saw stars falling like ripe figs from the heavens. He said, and when they hit the earth, the atmosphere was rolled up like a scroll. It says, all the cities of the Gentiles will fall. And it talks about this violent shaking of the earth. These predicted signs that are all so tenaciously coming together now tell us the general time of the final battle that'll bring in the second coming of Jesus Christ is very there.
Religious prophecy isn't simply confined to the Bible. Around the world, thousands say they are witnessing visions of the Virgin Mary right here and now. These sightings are often accompanied by miraculous lights, euphoric emotions, and the overwhelming fragrance of fresh roses.
It's difficult to say how many of these apparitions to the Virgin Mary are going on. It was basically popular to say 300 have been reported recently to the Vatican and are being investigated by bishops around the world. We don't really have a reckoning. We just know that there's a tremendous explosion. When people ask, have any prophecies come true so far from these apparition sites where the Virgin Mary is said to appear, the answer is definitely. We start out with Medjugorje in former Yugoslavia, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where our Blessed Mother came, warning that peace was in a state of crisis. She said, you don't understand how hideous things can get. She warned specifically that Croatians and Serbians and Muslims had to learn to get along or there were going to be major consequences. And indeed, we've seen that. You saw the same year that Medjugorje began, 1981, that same year, 7 visionaries in Africa began reporting the Virgin Mary there too. She showed them a stack of corpses. She said that their bodies would be beyond count. She said basically that a river of blood would course through that country. And that country is Rwanda, and we have seen recently exactly that happen. In one of the most interesting prophecies of this century came out of Akita, Japan, through a nun named Sister Sasagawa.
Sister Sasagawa's vision was unique because she reported physical evidence. On January 4th, 1975, the nun claimed to see a wooden statue of the Madonna begin to weep tears. Since then, hundreds of eyewitnesses have seen the same statue weeping. Weeping and bleeding statues of Mary have begun to appear in extraordinary numbers around the world. While some are frauds, others simply cannot be explained.
The issue of weeping statues, and especially of the Madonna, they're all over the place, just like these apparitions of the Virgin Mary. There is a sense, definitely, in some of these situations that statues do bleed, they do exude oil, they do sweat. There's a message there. There's a message that the supernatural exists. There's a message with the tears that perhaps heaven isn't happy with the course that the human race is taking right now. And again, that measures will be taken to put us in order. There have been prophecies that concern what they call 3 days of darkness. I don't know what to think of this, but it's a common theme among those who claim to be hearing voices or to be having visions, that the earth will go through this dark period. But certainly it's a major prophecy right now, and something that a surprising number of Christians, Catholics, believe in.
What could be the cause of such a disaster? Scientists believe they have an answer, as you'll see when Mysteries of the Millennium returns.
It's 6 miles across.
Probably the most dangerous object known to mankind.
An asteroid was the object that we feel is responsible for the extinction of the dinosaurs.
It is the energy, the destruction, the blast, 1 billion times what happened at Hiroshima. That is the frightening part.
The thing about the crash of a comet is that the consequences are so high. It doesn't happen often, but if it does happen, almost everyone dies.
NASA scientists say we have the same chance of being struck by an asteroid as we have of dying in a plane crash. Humanity has always feared fire from the sky, whether it be comets, meteors, or asteroid swarms. Recent discoveries suggest one fiery object in the form of a 6-mile-wide asteroid may have been responsible for the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. Could it happen again? Could it happen to us?
John.
What?
Take a look at this.
That doesn't make any sense. I bet it's the DD1 screwing up again. Did you check Delta?
Come here. Check these numbers. What the hell is this thing?
It's moving at 130,000. It's a missile.
It's got no infrared tail. It's coming up from the center.
Hell was that?
I'm checking the power.
Okay, Bobby, nice and easy now. Let's resequence up. Sequence 1, go. Check. Sequence 2, go. Check. Okay, coming back. Oh no. I got a nuclear event in Southern Africa.
Doesn't make sense. It's reached 750 degrees on the surface of Antarctica.
I'm going landlines to NORAD.
Oh my God.
It's 6 miles across.
urgency to find these objects, especially the one that would destroy society as we know it today, and there are about 1,700 of them. These 1,700 must be found as soon as possible because they have our name on it.
Well, the total number of people that are working to look for asteroids or comets that could in the future hit the Earth is less than the number of people working at a McDonald's, at one branch of a McDonald's restaurant. And they're probably being paid about the same amount as well.
Perhaps we should take the situation more seriously. Dr. Victor Klug, Dean of Astrophysics at Oxford University, believed that swarms of asteroids have already destroyed civilizations in the ancient past.
Ordinary history tells us that our ancestors were frightened out of their little lives by comets. There were large increases in the fireball flux around the time of Christ, at the time of the Dark Age, at the time of the Millennium. This famous monk, Gildas, talks about the fire of righteous vengeance. Literally, civilizations did collapse.
The word disaster means a bad star, and people at the time tended to associate the appearance of a bright comet or something in the sky like that with dire events on the Earth, like the death of the Emperor. There are records of comets going back several millennia. Some of the very best records of them are in the Orient, particularly by the Chinese. Actually, the Emperor of China employed astronomers to watch out for strange things in the sky.
The historical record is fair enough, and it has been our business to try and understand that record. But that has never been possible until the space age came along.
What Apollo did is it said, these are things hitting. But then the next question was, well, is that still going on? Or is that something that just happened a long time ago?
When you look at the cratered surface of the moon, we hypothesized that the asteroids and comets were responsible for the cratered surfaces. We knew that we had a bombardment as well, although most of our surface scars had been erased away from various forms of erosional processes. We needed to go out and get a real-time, present-day estimate of the population of these objects near our planet. There were these asteroids out there that could come in and approach, cross the orbit of the Earth, and certainly continue to impact our Earth, even on a long time scale.
What really focused the effort was in 1980, a Nobel laureate in physics, Louis Alvarez, proposed that what ended the life of the dinosaurs was an asteroid hitting the Earth.
Let's imagine that we're back on the Earth, and it's 65 million BC. There's brontosauruses, and there's tyrannosauruses, and there's stegosauruses. All the dinosaurs are walking around, and there is a bright comet in the sky. It disappears over the horizon, smashes into the Earth. It carves out a crater about 150 miles wide. All that dirt goes leaping up into the sky. The sky turns a bright pink, and all that stuff comes down everywhere on the Earth. It is raining these microscopic particles so that the temperature on the Earth is the same as an oven set to broiling. Anything that can burn ignites. There's forest fires, grass fires, and then a big dark cloud forms in the upper atmosphere, and the Earth just freezes for about a year. And so if the dinosaurs didn't die from the initial blast, then they would have died from the heat and the fires. And if they survived that, they would starve to death from the cold and the lack of plant life, which would have died because of no sunlight.
If we were to hit in the water and make a crater in the water, then you get a different and sort of a new idea about what to worry about. When you make a crater in the water, you start a wave. And it's very similar to what we see with earthquakes. Those are called tsunamis. And we've had to evacuate cities due to tsunamis.
The U.S. Congress became interested in the problem in 1990, and as a result, NASA set up a couple of committees to look into this.
The Space Watch program is vitally important at this time because it is the only professional program looking for near-Earth asteroids in the Northern Hemisphere.
The trouble is, if you suddenly discover something and it's only the distance of the moon when one discovers that it's heading our way, then we do have a problem because we've got to react very quickly.
Amateur astronomer David Levy became a celebrity in 1993 when he co-discovered a comet called Shoemaker-Levy 9.
Astronomy is that rare field where an amateur astronomer is capable of making major contributions to the field. And I think it's so amazing that a comet that I should help discover would smash into Jupiter.
Shoemaker-Levy collided with Jupiter in the summer of 1994. Broken up by the atmosphere, it struck the planet in 21 gigantic pieces.
Well, I remember when we first got the announcement, Gene and Carol and Shoemaker and I were at the observatory, and we were just looking at each other. We were absolutely stunned that this was going to happen. So you have an object about a third of a mile that's hitting Jupiter at the speed of 130,000 miles an hour. It's going to make a pretty big bang. It's going to produce at least in the order of 1 million megatons.
To see such a magnificent, stunning, awesome event from Earth, from the bleachers, so to speak, very few people really predicted the colossal effect that we saw from Earth.
I think if Shoemaker-Levy 9 and its 21 pieces were to hit the Earth, I think that the human race would survive it. But the devastation and the suffering would be beyond belief.
While it's true that a giant object like the one that killed the dinosaurs is expected to strike the Earth only once every 500,000 years, the fact is that it could happen tomorrow.
If we ever find one of these things and we have a few years of warning, would we choose to do something? And I think most people would say the answer is yes.
If we were to choose a weapon, my weapon of choice would be a neutron bomb. You set it off just off the surface of the object, and that vaporizes the side of the object facing you. By vaporizing that side and having material released, you push the object away.
We do have to prepare for the future in the sense that there is no guarantee in this picture that in the future we will not behave in exactly the same way as our ancestors did. Society's lost control, and we might be proud enough to think that we could never do it nowadays. That is, somehow the top nation, and it boils down to the top nation again and again, the top nation can keep control. I bet it can't.
Not everyone sees the future in terms of doom and gloom. In fact, some visionaries propose an intriguing future combining man and machine for a quantum leap in human intelligence.
We'll upgrade ourselves both biochemically and with computers implanted.
Join us for a glimpse into the 21st century when mysteries of the Millennium return. People have been predicting the end of the world since the beginning of time. In fact, history is full of doomsday dates that never panned out.
Sumerian seers foretold of the Earth's destruction from a misshapen sheep's liver and an ominous conjunction of stars. Ancient Persians claimed doomsday would come from a giant asteroid. In 1844, thousands of Americans found themselves caught up in the doomsday predictions of preacher William Miller. Newspapers reported that thousands stood on their rooftops waiting to be lifted to heaven. When the end of the world didn't come on October 22nd, 1844, Miller's followers called it the Great Disappointment.
Will our society face a similar disappointment? I certainly hope so. And so do many others. In fact, there seems to be a chorus of optimistic voices from people primed and eager to enter the 21st century. Max Moore, founder of the Extropian Institute, is one of them. He's looking forward to becoming post-human.
We will become post-human when we've achieved a very great degree of control over our biological constitution, which may involve not remaining purely biological, but perhaps merging with our technology, adding tiny computers to our brains. In theory, you could scan the brain or send in tiny devices to map the exact positions of all the neurons. And then you could write a computer program or build a computer device which would function in exactly the same way as your brain. Essentially, your consciousness will be transferred from your brain to this synthetic device, which could be backed up. You can make copies of it, and so if one gets destroyed, you continue on anyway. And of course, you can rewire it and reprogram it more easily. I think it's more likely that what we will do is go through a gradual transition where we first of all start to add computing power to our brains. Already we're seeing these handheld devices. Next it will be something you wear around your head, and then a little later it will be something implanted directly in the brain, and it will eventually become wired up with your neurons. So you have extra memory, extra processing abilities. Human beings will merge with technology. Rather than building super intelligent machines, we'll start to integrate them with our bodies and with our brains. We'll upgrade ourselves, both biochemically and with computers implanted. So we can keep up with the machines, we can modify ourselves and not get left behind. And if you're uploaded, then you have really the ultimate insurance policy, because you can make a copy of yourself. And if one of them gets destroyed in some huge accident, you get hit by a big truck or in a fire in a plane crash, then you can reactivate the backup. And if that was backed up last, say, a month ago, it would be no different than you losing a month's memories. There's no particular reason at this point not to see an open-ended future where we can become constantly better and better forever.
Max Moore's enthusiasm about becoming post-human comes as no surprise to author and biophysicist Greg Stock. Taking the man-machine connection even further, Stock suggests humanity is evolving into a new species. With advanced electronics, individual human beings are able to link to one another to form a global superorganism, which he calls Meta-Man.
We are at the threshold of an evolutionary transition of immense proportions. What I think is going on is that multicellular life, led by human beings, led by the structure, the human brain, are joining together to form a higher level entity that I've called Meta-Man. It's the biggest evolutionary breakthrough in 700 million years. Well, Meta-Man is much more than just humanity. It would not be possible without technology. It is really telecommunications and all our higher technologies that have drawn us into this very tight organizational collective. You can actually see satellite photos that are composites of the nighttime lighting over various continents, and you really see it. If you use time-lapse so that a year took only a second on this film, then you would see this thing spreading out, and it would be forming new nodes and retracting, and it would seem very vegetative. It would be almost pulsing. It would really seem like a living entity. We're a natural extension of the evolutionary processes that have been driving life forward since the beginning of time, for the last 3.5 billion years. We are the element that is generating this evolutionary transition of immense proportions.
With such massive change in the air, it's no wonder so many of us feel nervous, out of sync, convinced that the end of the world is at hand. Even normal human transitions, such as divorce, a new job, the death of a loved one, are likely to be frightening. And now experts tell us our society is transforming with unprecedented speed in ways that are hard to imagine. In his book, Century's End, author and scholar Hillel Schwartz helps put things into perspective. In fact, he tells us that our anxiety about crossing the threshold into a new era is nothing new.
The fear that we see now current as a kind of general anxiety about not just ourselves and our families, but about our society, is a fear that is in part built into the chronology that we are all living with, this common calendar, which was never so common as it is now. At the end of the centuries, particular at the end of this millennium, people tend to feel that the whole world has sped up. Everything has been accelerated so much that they feel that they are either out of place or they cannot keep up with the events and the pace of things. One of the feelings that people have at the ends of centuries is a feeling that all that is happening at the time has global importance, because now everything in our civilization has to make sense, and anything that is happening must be coincidental. No, not just coincidental, synchronistic. No, not just synchronistic, climactic. Everything has to fit together. And so when people look around them, they are looking for meaning in ways that they had not even thought to look for that meaning before.
There are very few people that are very optimistic about the future. One of the reasons for that is that there is such chaotic change going on around us today.
People have no certainties left. Everything is altering. And so they want some kind of sense that it won't go on forever because they can't take it.
People can't conceive of the changes that are going to occur, and it seems that it must lead to catastrophe in some way. And yet, it's like the single cells trying to imagine what would occur if all cells came together. They can't imagine multicellular life, human beings, all of the kinds of animals and plants that have evolved out of this transition. And for us, the change in potential is of the same immensity.
If the majority of us want this world to be a better place and want this world to be one of nourishment and healing and joy and excitement and mystery and adventure, then that's what we'll get. If the majority of us are going to predict doom, then we will work towards that end. Whether this world will end or not is dependent on us.
When people in the future look back on this period, they're not going to see it as this awful time when we squandered the resources of the planet, when we basically were out of balance with nature, when we robbed from our grandchildren. They're going to see it as this incredibly rich, exciting moment of time that was one of the most difficult ever, because it was the time of this birth, the time of this beginning.
Mysteries of the Millennium will be right back. In a famous poem, William Butler Yeats said, "Things fall apart, center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand." But is it true? Some revelation seems to be at hand as we cross into the 21st century. But is it the end of the world, or simply the end of the world as we know it? The answer, as always, remains a mystery. I'm Brad Johnson. Good night.
Might come has always fascinated and frightened mankind. Now, learn where these prophets claim to have discovered their profound knowledge. Some say they've traveled in time, while others claim ancient secrets can unlock the door to the future. Witness the most faithful predictions, predictions that may soon come to pass. Join David McCallum as we journey to new visions of the future.
The clock is ticking, and time may be running out. Over the centuries, prophets have seen the close of this millennium as the end of time as we know it. Some trace the warnings back to the prophets of the Bible. Others find evidence in the book of Psalms. And then there are voices alive today, from mystics and visionaries, seemingly blessed with supernatural insight, to the more common seers, ordinary men and women, some of them forever changed after a brush with death. But whatever the source, the prophecy remains the same. Something cataclysmic seems headed in our direction. Is our world doomed by fate, or is the future conditional? The answers may come sooner than we think. From ancient Babylonia to modern-day America, people have searched the heavens for answers to the past, present, and future. Very few have ignored its power. Astrologer Henry Weingarten.
Certainly many financial leaders from J.P. Morgan on have used astrology quite successfully. And there's a saying that was attributed to them: millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do.
Astrologer Edward Healin.
An astrologer can look ahead and pinpoint dates that things that happen, say whether it's 95 or 97 or 2010. For instance, we can look ahead to the year 2000 and say whatever president's elected in the year 2000 will not finish their term.
Astrologer Richard Houck.
I have determined the date of my own death, and I can tell you it'll be September 13th, 2031, when I'll be 84 of a stroke.
Astrologer Thomas Sears.
My accuracy in astrology is 90 to 95%. I can prove it, so I don't worry about it. When I make a statement, I've well researched it. Well researched.
Astrological forecasts are based on where the planets are during a particular event. Each time an event occurs, it's compared to planetary patterns.
The important thing to remember is it always has to be anchored in a chart. It has to be anchored in an accurate chart, a chart with a date, time, and place of birth, all of which are exactly accurate. Now, countries have charts, politicians have charts, and so on.
Throughout history, leaders from around the globe have relied on the stars for guidance.
Hitler, for example, in World War II, as soon as he ascended to power, he banned astrologers and did not allow them to function in Germany. He immediately went out and hired 6 astrologers that he used for his own purposes. In the area of the United States, it's very interesting. I mean, a lot of people don't realize, for example, that Benjamin Franklin, he was an astrologer, and he supposedly elected the inauguration moment for George Washington.
There's no question in my mind that the success of the Reagan administration was in large part due to the services that they used of Joan Quigley, who was their astrologer. For 7 years, nothing went wrong. She was allowed to choose the time things started, which made them much more successful.
From world leaders to corporate boardrooms, astrology has had influence. And for years, the world's financial power base has sought advice from the stars.
It was published in the New York Herald at the time that J.P. Morgan and Vanderbilt were using astrologers, which they both admit they did. And who can argue with success?
Not that only J.P. Morgan did, but the J.P. Morgans of our day do it. And the very wealthiest people, and I don't mean just wealthy people, I mean the very wealthiest people, the really rich money, do use astrologers.
I would say out of the Fortune 500 stock market companies, at least 300 of them are using astrology. Shall we say under the table?
We know, for example, the richest man in Hong Kong who pays his astrologer $4 or $5 million a year uses it quite extensively. We do know a number of Asian companies, a number of Indian companies that use astrologers quite heavily.
Henry Weingarten consults with large companies on when and where to move their money. Corporate decisions based on the position of the planet.
We work with technical traders that use my astrology timing and market themes as a secondary opinion. On many days, we're moving in excess of $50 million worth of commodities and so forth.
Henry Weingarten's client base is confidential. Shareholders might be shocked to learn, however, that frequently behind boardroom doors sits an astrologer.
People who are on the staff, who are financial astrologers, don't have the title financial astrologist, but rather than having titles like executive astrological analyst, they have titles like senior investment banker or chief trader or senior advisor. investment advisor.
The speed at which financial markets operate has brought the age-old practice of astrology into a computerized 20th century. Astrological forecasts are now more precise and accessible than ever before.
Now we have the computers, we just throw information into the computer, it pumps out an astrological chart. 2 seconds for it, right? There's quite a few calculations that you have to go through, putting all the planets in the right space.
The use of computers has revolutionized astrology because 100, 200 years ago, professional astrologers never calculated horoscopes. Their students did. Their time was too valuable. Their time was used in interpreting horoscopes, and their students did all the calculation.
With more time spent analyzing charts, astrologers can possibly look deeper and deeper into the future. However, not all of what they see is appealing, as every chart has its dark side.
Tonight, from ancient times to the present. Times to the present. Prophets claiming special powers have surprisingly predicted similar events.
Astrologers oftentimes will run across a chart that I guess by somebody's definition you might call terrible. If you have a correct chart, it is possible to predict the date of death for most people.
While astrologers claim that most people don't want to know the date of their own death, there are exceptions. Yet astrology, as with any other profession, has its own set of rules.
Don't discuss death with anyone. You don't discuss the time of dying, you don't decipher the time of dying, and you don't ever tell them when they're going to die.
Many astrologers believe that the knowledge of death doesn't necessarily promote life.
Astrology, to me, is like a handbook of life. Gives you a better shot at getting more out of it. Gives you a better shot at living it better. And I'm talking about living, not dying.
What about the closing years of this century? What about Mother Earth's future? What can astrologers tell us of the coming years?
So I think over the next 10 years there's really only going to be two key phenomena that occur. The first one will happen on January 25th of the year 2002, when we will have a very big stock market crash. That's a Friday. And the other will happen in the early summer of the year 2004, which will be even a much more powerful phenomena. And I would see that as most likely being associated with the land mass issues in the United States.
It's going to start before the year 2000. You're going to see a lot of things occurring. And 96 is sort of the key year as far as the west coast of America is concerned. They're going to start doing a lot of rocking and rolling. In the Midwest, what's going to happen is you'll get the flooding first, and then you'll get it receding and staying in certain areas, so that you can kiss Louisiana goodbye. You can kiss a whole big slice of Texas goodbye. And I'm looking for a good-sized quake in New York City. That's going to be even more devastating than California.
Much of what astrologers see is symbolic. A chart doesn't necessarily pinpoint an exact event.
It doesn't have to be just an earthquake. It can be an earthquake in our educational system or earthquake in our financial system. Yes, there will be more earthquakes.
Do we have a choice? Are we at the mercy of the planet's positions, or do we have control over our destiny? For the better or worse?
There's a general impression throughout Western society that astrologers think that planets cause things. Planets don't cause anything at all. What you do when you're trying to do a proof is you go back and you just look, like you do any scientific proof, is you're looking for patterns. See, astrology can't say what people are going to decide. People have free will.
The choice astrology gives you, it's like saying it's raining. Your choice is whether you want to have an umbrella or a raincoat. You can get wet or not. The purpose of astrology is to forecast things so that you can deal with them.
Wars have been fought over it. Martyrs have died for it. It has survived the rise and fall of civilizations. Every day, in many languages, countless millions find comfort and solace in its pages. And it is such a little book, the Bible. Many believe prophecy can be found within the pages of the Bible. They say the book of Revelations foretells the end of the world. And if prophecy is to be found there, perhaps it can be found in other books of the Bible. Each of the Psalms may predict events in the 20th century. Many have seemingly already occurred. Others may soon come to pass. Two biblical researchers believe they have found prophetic messages hidden within the book of Psalms. Author J.R. Church.
I had always thought that the Psalms were the simple songs of an ancient Jewish culture. Little did I know that they contained incredible prophecies, a literal guide to the 20th century.
Co-researcher and author Gary Stearman.
My initial reaction was there is no way this is true. This cannot be true. Until I went and studied, and I saw that it was absolutely, irrefutably true.
These researchers believe the Psalms predict events such as the rise of Hitler and another dictator in the Middle East, and that each Psalm corresponds to each year exactly. For example, Church believes Psalms 39 through 45 prophesied the plight of the Jewish people during the Second World War.
Psalm 44 is the most heart-wrenching of the Psalms, describing the Holocaust of the Jews in those death camps. During those years, thou hast cast off and put us to shame. Thou makest us a reproach to our neighbors. Yea, for thy sake are we killed. All the day long we are counted as sheep for the slaughter. In verse 17, God says to the victims of the Holocaust, I will make thy name to be remembered in all generations. From that day to this, the world has never been able to forget what happened to those victims.
Psalm 48, absolutely startling when you consider this is the Psalm of Israel's statehood, 1948. In verse 12, walk about Zion, mark ye well her bulwarks. Here's an instruction to the leaders of Israel, saying, go around Zion, go around Jerusalem, discover your ancient past, which is now buried in the sands of time.
The Psalms don't only describe the historical past. According to Church and Stearman, the Psalms seem to foretell of current events.
Psalm 91 is one of the most remarkable Psalms in Scripture, for it describes in some detail the events of 1991 and the Gulf War. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness. There was the fear that those Scud missiles contained chemical warheads. And yet God says, don't worry about them. And then he goes on to say that Israel is not going to get involved in this war. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. This psalm was so remarkable that it became the favorite song of the soldiers in the desert.
If Church and Stearman are correct, maybe there is hidden meaning in Psalm 93 as well.
Psalm 93 only has 5 verses in it. But verse 3 says, the floods have lifted up, O Lord, the floods have lifted up their voice, the floods lift up their waves. In 1993, there were floods, unprecedented in history, all over the world, not only in the upper Mississippi, but in Europe, in the Far East, in Africa. These floods all over the world seem to be a fulfillment of this prophecy.
Are these merely coincidences, or could it really be this century the Psalms describe?
When you have 95 Psalms to date that are in chronological order, you get a pattern here that is so overwhelming that one must admit that it is this century to which the psalmist was referring.
But what of our future? Church and Stearman believe the Psalms hold clues.
Once we come to Psalms 101 through 107, we have what appears to be a period of tribulation. Psalm 101, for example, indicates that God will early destroy the wicked out of the land. This word early means at daybreak, at the crack of dawn. And of course, If Psalm 101 represented the year 2001, it would indeed be the dawning of the new millennium.
But past the millennium, then what? The Bible contains only 150 psalms. If Church and Stearman are correct and each psalm corresponds to 1 year, this roadmap of prophecy may dead end in the year 2050.
Coming up next, mortals touched by the heavens with gifts of miracles and urgent visions of a world balanced at the brink.
Reportedly, believers by the thousands journey to Venezuela to seek the blessings of a visionary. The sick come in need of healing. Others may hope to witness a miracle. Visionary Maria Esperanza appears to be the vortex for a whirlwind of supernatural events. Deep within the forests of Venezuela lives a woman who claims to see apparitions of the Virgin Mary. Maria Esperanza is a wife, a mother and grandmother, and by some accounts touched by the divine. Producer-director Drew Mariani.
She's a prophet. She's a healer. She has the gift of bilocation, the ability to read souls.
Author Michael Brown.
If half of what they say about her is true, she's one of the major mystics, not just of our time, but of any time this century. A woman who has prophesied on any number of occasions events that have taken place in exactly the fashion she said.
On one occasion, she had prophesied to a group of pilgrims, and then she saw two very large towers in a city. And she feared for what was to happen to these towers. A few weeks later, the bombing of the Twin Trade Towers took place. She has prophesied the deaths of the past three popes. I was in her presence during one apparition where she saw a terrible earthquake take place. About a month later, she described it to me. During the World Series, an earthquake rocked California.
Maria claims visitations of heavenly beings began at an early age.
First apparition took place when she was age 5. At age 14, St. Teresa the Little Flower appeared to her, a brilliantly red rose, and she threw this rose to Esperanza. Instead of catching the rose, something pricked her right hand, and it began to bleed. And this was the onset of the stigmata.
As an adult, these alleged supernatural manifestations were to be witnessed by many.
Blood will erupt on her palms while she's praying in the Stations of the Cross on Good Friday. On one occasion, 2 doctors accompanied her and actually were there when the blood started to come from her hands. They weren't able to explain it.
Her son-in-law one day saw Maria kneeling in prayer. Suddenly her head went back, she stuck her tongue out, and before his eyes, a host materialized on her tongue. The bishop himself has witnessed such phenomena.
One of the most remarkable testimonies come from her children. One of her daughters said that she saw a light reflect on her mother, and her mother rose in levitation, her feet actually off the ground at that time.
All sorts of phenomena takes place. A mysterious fog that appears out of nowhere. Rose petals fall from the sky. The odor of roses are said to surround her. She's a woman that has blessed with many mystical gifts and charisms.
Of all her alleged gifts involving roses, one phenomenon is truly unbelievable.
It's just bizarre. I mean, it really is an incredible phenomenon. It's very, very hard to accept. The presence of medical doctors who have written sworn testimony to what they've seen. A budded rose came through her chest and opened up brilliant, beautiful red, even touched with dew, almost as though it was freshly picked.
Drew Mariani claims a personal encounter with Maria's supernatural gifts. Reportedly, it happened during a video interview that he conducted with Maria at her home in Venezuela. He witnessed a bilocation, a being in 2 places at the same time.
Many people have reported seeing Maria in one place when in fact she was in another. During the taping of an interview with Maria, I had asked her a question, and asked her to pray for a person I had known who was in a very severe car accident.
Maria, this isn't really part of our interview, but I have a question. It's about a friend.
Yes.
He's back in the States. He was in a bad car accident, and he's paralyzed.
I will go to him. Where does he live?
5, maybe 10 kilometers from my home.
Please, stop your camera. You will have a problem with your tape.
Keep rolling.
Your friend is in a dark room. He is drinking some tea, and he is wearing a blue shirt. I am taking his hand, and I am lifting him up.
When this incident was over, my cameraman was very skeptical that anything at all had happened. So when we got back to the hotel room, we called to the United States, called that person, and to his surprise as well as mine, described in detail exactly what he was wearing and exactly what had happened.
One of the extraordinary gifts that the Virgin Mary reportedly bestowed upon Maria Esperanza, the gift of healing, may have been witnessed by a young couple who gave birth to a very sick child named Ryan.
Gave birth to a little boy. Our sonograms were normal, and we had a big surprise. The little boy came out with spina bifida myelomeningocele.
At the base of his spine, in the center, was his spinal cord, open like an open book, exposed to the air.
I was devastated, really devastated. And to see that little boy, and then not knowing, you know, would he walk? You know, what kind of a life would he have?
Medical doctors offered little hope, so the Hulicks went searching for a miracle.
Here I had this little boy with all of these complications, and I wanted to go and hopefully see Maria Esperanza, ask for her prayers and her advice, and then take it from there.
Ryan was 2 years old when the Hulicks made the pilgrimage to Venezuela in search of a cure. During the long bus ride into the countryside, the Hulicks met a family therapist named Marilyn Bakeland.
What I saw was a very placid, sweet little child of 23 months who obviously had spina bifida. He wasn't moving. His eyes were not focused, slightly crossed eyes. Right away I'm thinking this was the trip that was going to cure their baby. They had such faith in this. I thought, oh, I hope they're not disappointed.
When they reached the Esperanza home, the Hulicks joined with the throngs of hopeful pilgrims. Waiting for them was an urgent message from Maria.
Mother Esperanza knew we were there. She said to her daughter, tell them that already I'm sending out my assistants to them, and that already all of his cells are changing, his blood is changing, the bones are changing, everything is already beginning.
The hour had come when Maria Esperanza was to take little Ryan into her arms.
She took him and she prayed with him, and she ran her hand all over him, and I realized that Jesus had already begun the healing before she even touched him. She said he's been set free at last, set free.
It was on the bus ride home that the Hulicks claimed to have witnessed a miracle.
We were on the bus going back to Caracas, and Ryan immediately showed a much increased strength. It was totally amazing.
It was as if someone had waved this magic wand, and this baby went from a retarded, placid baby to a normal 2-year-old. There wasn't any doubt in my mind this baby was cured.
You could see it in his eyes, that he had just been set free from this condition that he had been born with. And within the shortest amount of time of coming home, he was walking. And now he's just all over the place. He's doing great.
Of all the gifts Maria Esperanza claims the Virgin Mary has given her, the most profound is perhaps the gift of prophecy, because Maria says the Virgin has issued warnings for the future of mankind.
The Virgin has told Maria this is the hour of decision for mankind, that a very serious moment is approaching soon. She fears that we are on the doorstep of a global war. When you least expect it, be very careful, for she fears that the Soviet Union may try some sort of attack.
She warns about new diseases and plagues that will kill in a matter of days instead of a matter of years. And we are at a serious turning point. She says we face a lot of turmoil and perhaps catastrophic events, but in the end, the world will be a better place and there will be a great spiritual reawakening.
Tonight, from ancient times to the present.
As reports of healings, apparitions, visions of a dangerous future, and bilocation, being in two places at the same time, as these reports swirled around Maria Esperanza in Venezuela, another man far off was suffering in a brutal prison. His alleged crime was being a Catholic. His sentence, death by freezing. It seemed only divine intervention could save him. Exiled from his native Ukraine, living now in Toronto, Canada, he claims to hold the secret to hundreds of divinely inspired prophecies. Visionary and mystic Joseph Terelia.
I'm an instrument in God's hands. And there are a lot of things that I don't understand.
Today, living in freedom, Joseph Terelia appears to be an ordinary family man content to while away the hours painting. But a closer look at his art and his life will reveal the anguish and triumph of a modern-day prophet. Author Michael Brown.
Joseph Terelia is a truly remarkable mystic as well as a martyr. I mean, he never died, but he certainly suffered long and hard, 20 years in the Soviet prison system for being a Catholic activist in the dark, cold days of communism.
Joseph Terelia's odyssey of seemingly miraculous survival, prison escapes, and reported encounters with spiritual beings began the day he was thrown into prison at the age of 19. Dr. Roman Krutsky.
The reason he was placed in prisons was because of the violation of the Soviet code prohibiting the practice of religion. In fact, all forms of religious activity were totally abolished. The churches were desecrated in many ways. In some cases, they used them as outhouses. They would convert some of them into museums.
Hundreds and thousands were the priests and nuns who were actually executed for their religious activities. So it was a tremendously trying time.
Trapped inside the monolithic Soviet prison system, Joseph had two roads to freedom: renounce his religion or escape.
Joseph successfully escaped from Soviet prisons 9 times.
He was relentless in finding his freedom. I think one of the greatest miracles of his life is the fact that this man was never executed. They never did kill him. They tried a couple times, and they certainly tortured him. He was put into cells that there wasn't even enough room to move his knees when he sat down, cages that were cold, given only bread to eat.
They found it very hard to physically control him. They repeatedly tried to break his spirit by physically damaging him. So his hands were broken 5 times. They tried to dispose of him by putting him into a room with several murderers who were armed with knives. They split the veins in the back of the legs and just left him there. Fortunately, a guard saw this happening and he managed to get him out before he was dead.
Eventually, Joseph Terelia's time ran out. Prison officials had had enough.
They decided to kill Joseph by putting him in what they called a freeze cell. It was a cell where they piped in the cold, frigid Russian air. It was 100 miles northeast of Moscow.
They put me in the cell. They took away my coverings. It's hard to describe how cold it was. My eyebrows became heavy. The ends of my hair began to hurt.
At one point, he got up so he could get his head near this light bulb that was hanging from the ceiling for the warmth, because everything was so cold.
по решітці внутрішній, щоб погріти біля лампочки голову.
I pushed my head up against the light to try to heat my head. The guard there saw what I was doing and he switched off the light.
Death was imminent. It seemed Joseph was about to meet his maker.
The physiology of his body was following its normal course. He lay down on the cot, his body now very, very numb, and his eyelids were literally at this point frozen together. He couldn't open his eyes. As he was going through this, he was praying his final prayers, asking for the Blessed Virgin to help him in this hour of travail.
Joseph claims his prayers were answered and his life forever changed.
Коли от людина закриті очі має,
at this very moment, I felt an intensive light shining into the cell, and I couldn't raise my eyebrows, but I felt a light surround me and warm me.
He opened his eyes, and there before him was a beautiful, luminous woman whom he took to be the Virgin Mary. She said, "You have called for me, and I have come."
Спокій і доброта.
Solitude and goodness penetrated from her.
She began to speak to him and to give him prophecies about the future, warning about a great war that may occur between Russia and China and surrounding countries. She was showing him a map of the Soviet Union of fires breaking out there.
In the meantime, the prison is in an uproar. Guards rush in trying to make sense of this tremendous light, and as they open the door of his cell, the light disappeared.
They were stunned to see this man alive. He should have been frozen to death. They were equally stunned to feel the warmth, the heat in that cell. And they accused him of using yoga and all this other stuff, and he said, "No, I was visited by an apparition of the Virgin Mary."
Joseph was placed in a psychiatric hospital for observation, but he was far from crazy. He claims he'd forged a permanent connection with the supernatural, a connection that made him a conduit for prophecy and brought him renown throughout the world. Joseph still had years to spend behind bars, but he used his time painting and to secretly orchestrate a Ukrainian human rights movement.
Reagan за мене інтерв'ював, Mitterrand.
I was quite well known throughout the world. President Reagan, President Mitterrand spoke in my defense.
After surviving 23 years of misery for refusing to renounce his faith, Joseph Terelia was released from prison. But his journey wasn't over.
He was expelled from the Soviet Union because he was engaged in anti-communist activity with the Catholic underground, with the Christian underground in general. He also worked with oppressed, persecuted Jews. And so they wanted him out of the country, and they exiled him to Canada.
It wasn't until he reached the West that the world learned of the magnitude of prophetic visions Joseph claims were given to him by the Virgin Mary. Joseph Terelia's spiritual director, Bishop Roman Danilak of Toronto, Canada.
He spoke before the joint houses of the Senate and of Congress, with people at the Pentagon and the White House itself.
He has seen the Pope more than 36 times. 200 prophecies of Joseph have been released by the Vatican, and his visions are essentially apocalyptic in nature.
There will be a great flame or fire in southern Russia. A person will appear called Vladimir. He will call on Russia to destroy Israel.
He has spoken of the San Andreas Fault and the Pacific coast going to the Green.
Південь Америки.
The southern part of the state and the coast of California. There will be earthquakes, and it will sink into the water, or be covered by water.
Joseph warns us that even though we may think things are peaceful, even though things may seem to be going very well in places like the Soviet Union or China, to watch out, because they could be powder kegs that are ready to explode.
Tonight, powers have surprisingly predicted similar events.
Nostradamus may be the most well-known, but throughout the history of man, many other prophets have surveyed the future. And from this chorus of minds comes a collective voice, warning that devastation may be coming our way.
H.G. Wells was an anguished, almost biblical prophet, torn between two visions, one of salvation and one of doom. He was obsessed with the future, so much so that he invented a machine to take him there, a time machine. Some of what Wells saw as he peered into the future aroused and excited him. Much of what he saw filled him with horror. Writing at the end of the last century, he pioneered a new kind of fiction, science fiction. But it was as a prophet, a futurist, a traveler through time that he really made his mark. Forecasting the coming century so vividly and so well that he became known as the man who invented tomorrow. Wells was an amazingly accurate prophet, in things both big and small. Everything from superhighways and overcrowded cities to computers and television. Professor Gary Westfall.
He did have a good imagination for envisioning little things that might improve people's lives, like a modern video cassette player, so that instead of reading novels, people watched them in their homes, and babble machines that told them the news, very much like modern radio.
Wells' most remarkable forecasts, however, had to do with war. He virtually invented tanks, or land ironclads, as he called them, describing them so vividly that he claimed a patent on them during the First World War. And Wells, writing in the era of the horse and buggy, forecast the military use of planes, along with the horror they would bring to modern warfare. Professor George Slusser.
Wells was fascinated with what would happen if you would bomb cities. Air warfare means that all lines and boundaries are down. If you go deep into an enemy country, bomb its cities. Not only destroy military targets, but you can also attack civilian targets.
Now the bomb was going to drop on your living room, and you could get killed. There was no front anymore. When you had airplanes, the whole country was part of the battle zone.
Wells made his most startling prediction about modern war in 1911, when he forecast a new kind of weapon, an atomic weapon.
He was the first to really envision fully atomic bombs, and he saw them getting out of control and being used to such an extent that they virtually devastated the world.
Wells predicted that the bomb would be made of uranium and used to destroy cities. As he said, in the middle decades of the 20th century.
H.G. Wells fully believed that the human race was capable of destroying itself unless something radically dramatic happened to change things. There was like a preset course that humanity was on, which would lead to perhaps not only the death of humanity, but the death of the world itself.
Wells' last book of prophecy was The Shape of Things to Come. His final vision was dark but hopeful, full of untold violence, but also the possibility of enlightenment and change. Writing in 1933, Wells predicted an apocalyptic world war.
All of the cities and all the infrastructures and everything are destroyed, and so what you're going to get are little pockets of surviving humanity. Feudal societies, basically, enslaving their people.
But out of this, Wells prophesied a new consciousness would emerge, spearheaded by a visionary elite that would take control of the weapons of war and create a world state.
These airmen come and they stop this fighting. I mean, they're able to pacify the people and to lead them, literally, to a new world where they build a new state of technological wonders.
By the middle of the 21st century, Wells envisioned a peaceful world, liberated from old hatreds and adorned with scientific marvels. Wells' most far-fetched vision, of course, was time travel itself. Amazingly, here too, science has begun to bear him out.
There are a lot of scientists today who are pondering the problem of time communication. In other words, communicating with the past through faster than light particles.
Apparently, Einstein's theory of general relativity does allow for the creation of a time machine. And one physicist has worked out a fairly detailed scheme for doing it. It does seem to be possible.
Almost a century ago, H.G. Wells wrote The Time Machine. In this story, he traveled 800,000 years into the future and saw a terrible world in which the descendants of the working class were literally eating the descendants of the upper class.
They became cannibals in the sense that these beautiful people that are on the upper world are their cattle. Quite simply, they're raising them in order to eat them. What Wells, as time traveler, saw as a beautiful utopian world first turns out to be a nightmare world.
The nightmare became worse when Wells zoomed further into the future, 30 million years further, and he caught a glimpse of a dying planet, breathing its last under a huge red sun.
The Time Machine still remains a classic work because its prediction is still very accurate in terms of scientific theory. This heat death of the universe is still very much the end of all things.
Wells was always convincing when he wrote about doomsday, but he didn't think disaster was inevitable.
He expressed very strongly the belief that the human race could survive and could improve itself. Wells did not seek to be a prophet. He was not writing in order to predict the future, but to change the future.
Wells himself had to struggle to stay optimistic as he saw some of his nightmare predictions come true. The bomb in particular pushed him toward despair. Near the end of his life, he was asked by a friend what he wanted as an epitaph. Wells replied, "Damn you all, I told you so." Of course he did. Wells had been telling the world about the future since he dreamed up his time machine 100 years ago.
It's an odd fact that one of H.G. Wells' earliest books was about a time machine, and so many of the things he wrote about later on seemingly came true. So why are we so skeptical about a time machine?
The story of time travel reads like a fable. A tale of desperate wartime experiments may be linked to a death in a lonely park in the year 1959. The secrets now known as the Philadelphia experiment were almost lost forever with the alleged suicide of one Dr. Morris K. Jessup. Author Preston Nichols.
It's really questionable whether or not Morris Jessup committed suicide or was killed, but apparently there are reports that there was two very well-dressed gentlemen seen walking away from the car early in the morning.
Just days before his untimely death, Dr. Jessup had reportedly received a series of cryptic letters written by a retired merchant marine named Carlos Allende.
Carlos Allende was a merchant marine in the Philadelphia harbor when the Philadelphia experiment was tried.
In his anguished notes, Allende spoke of some terrible experiment he'd witnessed on a ship named the USS Eldridge, back during the dark days of the Second World War. Author Andrew Strom.
What the men on the Eldridge experienced is nothing like anybody has ever experienced. Nothing. Because death, I assure you, would have been easier to live through.
Back in the early 40s, as World War II raged across the lands and seas, desperate times called for desperate action. Author Al Bean.
We were in the middle of World War II, and the German U-boat fleet was having a field day, sinking 50% of the shipping going across the Atlantic at that time. And the hope was that by making the ships invisible, both the maritime ships and the Navy ships, they could defeat the German radar and they would not be able to find a target to torpedo.
Allegedly, the ill-fated Philadelphia experiment was the U.S. Navy's first attempt at stealth technology. making a ship invisible to radar.
So this is what they were trying to do, and this is what they did do. They succeeded in it in terms of the actual hardware. The ship became invisible, but the personnel couldn't take the effects. And the effects were unbelievable, phenomenal, and totally unexpected.
Reportedly, the initial research that led up to the disastrous experiment in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in 1943 was conducted years earlier by the famed scientists Albert Einstein and Nikola Tesla.
Nikola Tesla, back in the 30s, became involved with a group that was experimenting with the ability to move through the time-space continuum.
The experiment started back in Princeton University in about 1939, 38. And as they got the thing developed to where they could make something small invisible, then they got it to an object maybe that big. And that gathered the attention of the government.
The military, because we are at war, wanted to pursue it in their direction, of course. So Tesla had finally come to the same conclusion that Einstein did, which was that this technology, if developed, would not be used for the benefit of mankind.
As the story is told, the war raged on and the military needed answers fast. So a full-scale ship was outfitted electronically and a test was scheduled.
In 1943, we conducted a dry run. We had use of domestic animals, dogs, cats. And we placed them in different metalled cages along through the ship, the USS Eldridge.
They threw the switches. At that point, electric fields and magnetic fields were generated on a wholesale basis. So you got astronomical amounts of energy.
Reportedly, after the power was shut down, sailors boarded the USS Eldridge to find the experiment had run into trouble.
There was a lot of problems with the animals. Radiation burns, and many of them were missing.
Despite the setbacks, it's claimed the Navy's response to the first trial run was full speed ahead. So on August the 12th, 1943, the USS Eldridge, with a full crew aboard, reportedly underwent the Philadelphia experiment. On the ship, the day may have begun as any other, with the crew attending to routine duties, but the countdown had started. The Eldridge was about to become a legend.
They fired this thing up, they got the generators going. When they threw the switches, that's when all the bizarre stuff started happening.
So we turned it on, and of course, the ship became radar invisible within a short period of time. And to those who were observers on the carrier, as well as a commercial ship known as the SS Priusef, a merchant ship, it appeared like the tests were going according to plan. But something went wrong at the last minute, and all of a sudden there was a flash of light. The ship disappeared completely and was gone from the harbor for about 4 hours.
Instead of merely becoming invisible to radar or even the naked eye, legend has it the Eldridge was actually transported through space and time.
We shot it through the time-space continuum. We arced it through.
It literally took off. I don't mean flying. I meant it just plain disappeared to hyperspace. It was there approximately 4 hours and then returned to the place where it had been originally.
Allegedly, a boarding party was dispatched to the Eldridge because something appeared terribly wrong.
There was a greenish sort of haze on deck, not very heavy, sort of like clouds in a way. The personnel were milling around. They were very sick and ill and quite insane.
And some of them had heart attacks. These were young men, but it was that bad.
People buried in the deck, in the bulkhead. Their bodies were enmeshed with the steel of the deck. But some just literally walked into nothing, according to some of the reports, and they never were seen again.
The questions linger. Where did the USS Eldridge go when it apparently vanished for 4 hours? Some theories placed it in Norfolk Harbor, 275 miles away, while even more incredible claims suggest that it voyaged 40 years into the future. And what about the missing sailors? One account points to a mysterious incident at a local bar.
A group of sailors, according to the story, boiled out of a back room of the bar. A little research showed the fact that this bar had no back room. They came out of the wall. There was some connection between the Philadelphia experiment, what happened in that bar.
Officially, the Navy denied everything.
They denied that there ever was such an experiment because of the complications involving what happened to these personnel. They couldn't explain it properly. Those died, they said, were lost at sea.
Some believe there's an even more compelling reason that the Philadelphia experiment was kept under wraps. The project was a success. They supposedly built a time machine.
They do not want the public to know they've had access to time travel for over 40 years.
They have the technology today to move back and forth through the time continuum, both past and future. Yes, we can time travel today.
Some contend that time machines are being clandestinely used to forecast our future.
They're taking no chances. The government has been able to view in the future what is going to come down. Now, whether it comes down exactly the way they've seen it, or with some variation, they know there's going to be serious trouble. But they know in general that the future is not cast in stone. It is changeable. It's anybody's guess what may happen.
The events of 1943 are fading into the past. What horrors did the young merchant marine Carlos Allende witness that were to shadow him into old age? And what was in those cryptic letters he sent to Dr. Morris K. Jessup? Did the doctor die because he knew too much? Did he take the secret of the USS Eldridge to his grave? After 50 years, the Philadelphia experiment has become shrouded in mystery and legend. So, did the USS Eldridge suddenly disappear? Did it fly forward in time? Did it reappear hundreds of miles away? Naturally, the United States Navy dismissed the incident as a wild and crazy myth. They insisted time travel was impossible. They still do. But is it?
Coming up next, it threatens entire continents. Scientists predict it. Futurists envision it. But when the Earth begins to tear, anything could happen.
What I tell you about mixing fighting with women? Get upstairs.